The Sporland division of Parker Hannifin Corporation is sponsoring this podcast. Sporland is the leading manufacturer of HVAC and R components. Using quality materials and craftsmanship, Sporland maintains a commitment to innovation, manufacturing excellence, service, and support for its customers since 1934. The company is known for its catch-all filter dryers, thermostatic expansion valves, solenoid valves, pressure regulating valves, suction filters, electric valves, controllers, supermarket monitoring solutions, chemicals, smart service tools, Zoom Lock Max Press to Connect, and Zoom Lock Push to Connect refrigerant fittings. If folks want to learn more, what do they do?
You can go to sporland.com.
I guess that's Jim and John for Sporland signing off.
For a decade, Field Peace refrigerant leak detectors have set the industry standard for durability, sensitivity, and now reliability. Now our two newest detectors are raising the bar. The infrared refrigerant leak detector DR82 and the heated diode refrigerant leak detector DR58 bring the highest level of performance and offer a new bright blue backlit LED screen that is easy to read and understand. They are built to work all day and all night with USB rechargeable batteries that can get 10 to 18 hours of use per charge. Learn more at fieldpeace.com or follow us on social media at Fieldpeace Products. Thanks, guys.
We've all been there, in the middle of a job, everything going smoothly, until boom, you're missing a part. United Refrigeration is your one-stop shop for all your refrigeration needs. Use your computer or smartphone to go to www.uri.com at any time of day or night to check stock on your favorite brands, such as Copeland, Sporland, Carlisle Compressors, Danfoss, Emerson CPC boards and sensors, Carrel, Hussmann Parts, and K2Therm. United Refrigeration Inc. is home to these brands and many more. Looking for information on refrigerant conversions or refrigerant banking? Quick access links on the homepage can get you to the information you need. All approved accounts are able to see live to-the-minute inventory and pricing. Product not in stock at your local branch? No problem. Use the Nearby Stock feature to find a local branch that does have what you need. Are you looking for a branch address, phone number, or after-hours number? That's all available as well. Just click on the branch locator and search for your local branch. Have a model number and looking for a replacement part? www.uri.com/ARP has a vast list of quick pick replacement parts. Just search for the model number of the equipment you're working on and click the Replacement Parts tab. If you don't have an account, click the Register button and we'll have you online in no time. With more than 400 locations in North America, each United Refrigeration branch is fully stocked for immediate pickup. Our branch employees have in-depth technical knowledge, so we can help you get what you need when you need it. Visit your local store or www.uri.com/ARP today. United Refrigeration Inc. has all your solutions down cold.
This uplifting cinematic experience.
I've got something important to tell you, man.
The big story is...
Dig this and dig it deep.
Hey, good effort. Way to go, way to go.
Dude, don't encourage him.
You assholes know I'm being sarcastic, right?
I've been called the songbird of my generation.
Holy shit.
I'm holding in a huge miss, so could you get to the point?
Terrible! Awful! I hated it!
War's over, man. Werman dropped the big one.
Bloody psychopath. High-functioning sociopath.
I never thought I'd see the day when two such highly reputable mischief makers as yourselves douse some drawers at the side of a mall security guard.
I see you got fat.
force is strong with this one.
What are you, 8?
You're waking the neighbors!
She still look like a 15-year-old girl, but not hot.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Advanced Refrigeration Podcast. You're here with your hosts, Brett Wetzel and Kevin Compass. What are you doing? What do you got? Where are you going? Oh, I heard you're going somewhere fun tomorrow.
Well, I gotta go to Ohio. I wouldn't call Ohio fun. It's like the most boring state in the world.
I was thinking about that, and I thought maybe Utah.
No, Utah actually has like mountains and stuff and like deserts. Ohio just has it's like a slightly worse Michigan.
Yeah, I could say that.
Sort of. I mean, I don't know. I have to go to Ohio for like a day. At least I'm not dying like I was last week in Texas.
Yeah, how hot was it in Houston?
It was 107. And I ended up with a double ear infection and a sinus infection. And I was dying every single day I was there.
Yeah, the humidity was no joke either.
No, I could have ate a bullet every day and I would have been happy. Like, it was just absolutely horrendous. I don't know why people live there.
They like living next near the bay, I guess.
I mean, I'll take a little bit of snow and some cold weather. That was brutal. Plus the sinus infection and the double ear infection was, that was fun. Being on a scissor lift and like just getting dizzy.
And that's why I ended up having to get my surgery when I came down here. So living here for the first year and a half, 2 years, straight 2 years, every year I got a sinus infection so bad that my ears had swelled up, my face swelled up. I looked like Sloth in the Goonies. And I would get vertigo for the first time in my life. And I was like, what the hell? Like, what is different? And like, I realized I was sweating more. So I was sweating more and I wear earbuds all the time. So I could, when I'm in the motor rooms, whatever, and it would just block everything up scenario. So the next time I went to the doctor, I was like, I don't care what the hell you have to drill, saw, whatever you have to do, just clear it so it doesn't happen ever again. And I got the surgery and I'm 1,000 times % better.
Yeah, they refuse to give that to me. So, but all right, guys, tonight we're gonna go kind of back to the basics a little bit, and I've had a couple of apprentices ask for this. We're gonna go over self-contained 101. So, not the most exciting thing out there, but I'll tell you this: I've watched self-containeds kick journeyman mechanics' ass, time and time again, because it's something super simple. But super simple things get overlooked. So talking to self-contained, guys, I mean, they are getting more complicated, but we're talking a compressor, a cap tube, a evaporator, and a condenser, and temperature control. You're talking the basic self-contained true unit, anything like that. We're going on to the basic. We'll start with the cap tubes. The number one thing, guys, keep the condensers clean. You keep the condensers clean, they're not going to plug cap tubes. I've seen guys time and time again, they will add gas to a cap tube unit. They think it's low on gas, it's running low suction. They'll add gas to it. Turns out it's really a plug cap tube. So the way I approach this, I think, is the easiest way out of anything. So if I come to a cap tube unit and I suspect there's a leak or a plug cap tube, instead of guessing and adding gas and doing all of this, I will evacuate it, pull a vacuum, and I will dump the charge back into it. And I will watch what it does. I'll scale it right back in, plus added to my hoses. After I do that, I will start the unit back up and see how it runs. If it's still running super low suction, then it's a plug cap tube. If it's not and it's running good, then we have a leak.
I'm with you. I'm with you almost to the end. So the only thing that I do differently, if I suspect that I'm low on charge first, because it happens so frequently, even on units that aren't even 6 months old, I'll pour water in the desuperheating pan or the condensate, whatever you want to call it, the condensate pan that uses the discharge line to evaporate that water off. And typically you will find a leak in there. And I'm apprehensive about just pulling the charge because you don't know if you have a leak. And then, you try to pull a vacuum and then you have non-condensables in there, especially if you already have crap in the pan. Then you're going to suck all that water back in. So I'd rather just leave it pressurized and see if we can see any bubbles coming off the bottom pass to that. Because usually those are the first to leak. Because you got to remember all the acids that are in the salads and salad dressings and stuff like that is going to attack and get on the coil, right? Then that water is going to drain, go into the evaporator pan. Then you're basically left over with really acidic water, and then the evaporator evaporates off. I'm sorry, the condensate pan evaporates that off, and then you're left with really acidic juices that end up eating the crap out of that pan.
I left out one part. I usually will stick a leak detector in by the pan to see if anything does go off before I pull the vacuum.
Yeah, I mean, because usually the only places I ever see those really leak is in the condensate pan, or if it's in like a medium temp produce, it'll be the evaporator.
Yeah, generally it's always the evaporator or the condensate pan.
I don't. And going back, I never understood why I had such a hard time leak checking self-contains. Like I had such a hard time with it. I have no idea why. Probably because I just didn't know how to use the damn leak detector.
Well, not even just that. I mean, you're talking something that's leaking. It holds 10 ounces and an ounce and a half low. It's it's causing performance issues, and you're talking it may lose that ounce and a half over a year.
Yeah.
So you're talking at the bare minimum. It could be a super tiny leak to find. So going like Brett said, like the Kello cap tube thing. And if I do have a plug cap tube, and if it's an emergency, this is something you could do. I don't recommend doing this unless you absolutely have to. Is pull the cap tube out and cut 2 inches off of it. I mean, generally the blockage is in the first 2 inches of the cap tube. So if you have to, generally it's in the first 2 inches, and change the dryer to a 032 Sporlan cap tube dryer, not those copper spun ones. Those Sporlan cap tube dryers are a lot better.
So note on that, whenever you do that, you have to make sure that you compensate for the additional charge. On every single Sporlan filter dryer, it'll tell you how much refrigerant to add based off of what refrigerant you have. So if you're using R22, it might tell you to add for an 032, it might tell you to add like 2 ounces. Because you got to remember that filter dryer now is acting almost like a mini receiver, if you will.
Correct.
So the system's going to add capacity. You're going to need to add capacity of charge to it in order to to make sure it's not undercharged.
Same thing for your hoses. So I think a 6-foot hose holds, is it 2 ounces or 4 ounces?
You know what? Honestly, usually what I'll do is from my center hose to because I always have ball valves on every end of my gauges. So when I charge the thing up, I'll figure out, okay, if I just release the refrigerant and the tank dropped down 3 ounces of liquid, then I know that they actually hold 3 ounces of liquid from where the ball valve stopped. And that's how I'll figure out how much additional charge that I have to add in.
I want to say it's 4 ounces, allegedly.
Per 6-foot hose?
Well, I don't use gauges, so I'm only using one hose.
Oh, okay.
That's another thing on self-contained, guys. Avoid gauging up unless you absolutely have to, unless you're using probes. The self-contains and ice machines are like a game changer for probes. So, you're talking, you're going to lose a smidgen of an ounce, whether if you're hooking up a set of gauges, you could lose 4 to 6 ounces, on something that holds 14 ounces of gas is a lot.
Question.
Yep.
How much is a smidgen?
You're an asshole.
I've never
than
heard
the
smidgen.
scientific measurement.
I've heard mouse fart.
Oh God. So yeah, I mean using probes. I have started using temp probes for a lot of things. So like generally with a self-contained, I'll throw a psychrometer, inside of the inside the case, and then I will grab some temp clamps. So an outside an ambient air temperature, and then I will take suction temperature, and I will take my liquid temperature, and using like Measure Quick, almost like how they do the CTOA and what your evaporator temp should be, you could get pretty close to like seeing how that unit is supposed to run. So if your liquid temp is room temp, you got a problem. Like 100%. Go ahead.
One of the things I do now people will ask me, what is the proper way to charge a self-contained? And basically, it really is simply is pull the whole charge and charge it back up. When I do PMs to make sure they're functioning the way they should, because I'm not going to throw gauges on every single time I do a PM because some of these systems now don't even have it. But here's a good estimation on if the unit is working properly. And correct me if you don't agree with me. I mean, this is just something that's worked for me for the past couple of years. Whatever your ambient is in your store, right? Typically, a store is about 75 degrees. Now, you can estimate that most split or single condensing units have about a 20-degree TD. So you can estimate that your saturated condensing temperature should be approximately about 95 degrees, 20 degrees higher than the ambient, which was what I stated was 75. Minus 5 degrees, because you typically get about 5 degrees of subcooling out of the condenser, then your liquid line temperature should be about 90 degrees. And as long as the amperage is within tolerance of what the compressor said it should be pulling, I think you're golden.
Yeah, I mean that's not bad for like an eyeball. I mean, you're never going to beat the scale charge. I mean, that's
no,
going
but
to
if
get
you're
you
doing
right there.
just if you're just doing a PM where you're breezing through, you're hitting the condenser out, taking the amperage and just checking that liquid line temp versus the subcooling, the saturated condensing temperature, and all that stuff put together, right?
Bingo. Yeah, I mean that's what I'm going for here. Like that's where I was going with the temp clamps. Watching that and then checking the amp draw and then seeing how it's cycling. So like the biggest thing with these guys, a lot of these units they have constant cut-in cold controls in them. So a lot of them they have a temperature control shoved inside the coil. So it's called a cold control technically. So what it's doing is it's actually sensing the inner coil temperature, and that is how they're cycling the box temperature. That's why you'll see like especially Trues and Delfields, like your cheaper brands, when they start plugging a cap tube up, you'll usually get a call for a box running too cold before that. Like randomly, it'll run too cold. So what happens is the center of the coil doesn't make temperature because the cap tube's plugging, and the outer parts of the coil still pull down, and the box overshoots temp because that temperature control is not sensing the coil temperature down to temp. So say if it's supposed to cut out at 18 degrees coil temp and it's only getting to like 20, it's still going to overcool the box. But that liquid refrigerant's flashing off before it hits that cold control, and it's not allowing it to shut off. That's why you'll see some nuisance overcooling complaints before you'll see a plug cap tube.
So a lot of times going through that pigtail should probably be near the first pass of once the cap tube enters the coil, and that's because that's going to be the coldest part of the coil. A lot of these ones that he's talking about, because I mean you're not going to have a huge defrost clock on a single medium temp case. So a lot of these have what's called a constant cut-in. So no matter where you turn that dial, that's the cutout. But the cut-in is always the same. So typically they try to make it 40, 41, 42, whatever the manufacturer spec'd. for that particular unit. And then the only thing that actually changes when you're actually turning the dial, that's why it says colder, is basically the cut-in temperature. So if you're trying to maintain, I don't know, 30-degree box, maybe it has a 10-degree TD, so it's going to wait until that whole coil gets at 20 degrees. So it's going to, get you. That's how you're going to get your discharge air. Except for it's not going to let the unit come back on until the coil is completely, clear of frost at the 41 or 42 degrees.
Yeah, 100%. That is exactly what's going on. And you guys got to remember, most of these units are the cheapest of cheap. Like, I mean, that's why they're not having defrost clocks on here. And I mean, they're built very cheaply. They're not cheap, actually. Like a fucking true two-door cooler is like $7K, which is outrageous. So just keep that in mind with those constant cut-ins. A lot of stuff you're going to start seeing now is you're going to start seeing like Dixel controllers and Corel controllers. And a lot of these units are starting to get microprocessor controllers in them. So, I mean, they're getting better. So constant cut-in controls are starting to cost more probably than digital controls at this point. So you're starting to see more and more, but I see a lot of problems. I don't know if you've seen this when they say they put a Dixel controller in, like an XM controller, and they're using that to cycle the compressor. It seems like they have a super high failure rate. It can't handle the contacts.
Yeah, my advice, if you have a failure like that where it bones out one controller, is typically because it doesn't take the inrush real good. So I mean, I would suggest putting in a pilot relay for it. So then basically the only thing you're running is the control voltage through the pilot relay, which is going to work the contact that you're going to install.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I do anytime I lose a controller like that, because I mean, a $25 relay is a, $200 insurance policy that it's not going to happen again.
Not with all the back orders and shit. You're like, well, just put something in it, and then you have to run new sensors and whatever else. It's just a pain. I mean, I found out the hard way. And I had asked this question on one of the forums, and I was like, what sensor is, will go good with this Dixel controller? And it was one of the ones that you pulled off the shelf from United. And everyone's like, oh, just put a CPC sensor in there. Just put a CPC sensor in there. So I did. And then I started weighting down the temperature, and I'm like, wait a minute. I started, like, the temperature didn't match my thermocouple once it started getting like in the low 40s into the 30s. And then that's when I realized it was still a 10K sensor, but it was a 10K type 3 rather than a 10K type 2. And a lot of these other sensors, I have no idea what the hell they're putting in. So Corel, I'd have to heat them all up to 77 degrees and take a shot in the dark of which one I thought it was. I mean, Corel's making a... What's that?
I usually stock the Dixel stuff just so we can use a CPC sensor.
So you can't?
So you can.
I don't think you can't, though. Those things are set for...
You could change it.
Yeah?
You could use a Danfoss sensor with a XM controller.
Are you talking about the XM, or are you talking about like the CX, like multi-use Dixel?
Say the multi-use Dixel.
Okay.
So you have three different options. You have a PT1000, you have their version, and you have PC sensor. At least on like the ones in like the last 2 years.
I had them on my truck, but I don't know. I had one 240, one 24, and one 120, I think. Just to cover the gamut.
Like that's what I use for like even walk-ins and stuff. But like, so like if I got a bad call control, I know this is like kind of like against, guys, I'm not usually putting a cold control back in. I'll usually retrofit a Dixel in.
Hey guys, today's episode is sponsored by Westermeyer Industries Serviceable Oil Floats. Many oil separators contain an oil float to effectively meter separated oil back to the compressors. Westermeyer Industries has taken this concept and perfected it with their new line of serviceable oil floats. These floats feature an improved design with fewer components, allowing for greater manufacturer consistency and up to 20% increased oil flow versus their legacy models. These floats also feature an integrated magnet to shield the oil path from debris and have been field proven in supermarket applications. Westermeyer Industries offer replacement oil floats not only for their own separators, but also cross-compatible models for our competitor oil separators as well. You can find out more about the Westermeyer Industries serviceable oil floats by visiting westermeyerind.com/floats. Once again, that's westermeyerind.com/float. Let's get on with the episode. All right, guys, here's question number 2 for the month of June for the Field Piece giveaway. Once again, answer the question and send it on over to arpgiveaways@gmail.com. What is the signal that is given to a IDCM module? From what to what would be 0 to 100%? Let me know.
I don't know what my kids are doing back there. Jeez, oh Pete. I'll usually retrofit a Dixel in. So, I mean, it seems like you get way better control out of it.
I got you.
And my daughter's upset.
She didn't get a piece of pizza.
Yeah, they're bad if the dog ate it. All right, guys. So like now kind of moving on to some more like cumbersome
receiver.
So like
receiver type stuff.
Yeah. So like smaller stuff with receivers, just be very, very careful charging these things. Like don't clear the glass until the thing's almost down to temp. I mean, they're very temperamental. Like you're talking a receiver, they may be the size of like a water bottle. So it's not going to take very much liquid.
Mm-hmm.
And then same thing, check in subcooling on like some of that stuff. If you don't have a sight glass, you can at least maybe check subcooling on the outlet of the condenser to see if you actually have some liquid there.
Yeah. What do you think about the cold pack units, the ones that are on? Should I even ask this question? I know I'm going to get the answer.
They're not
the units that are the ones that are on top of the walk-ins, where it's basically a self-contained, just sitting on the top of a walk-in.
Self-contained. Oh my God! I have so much disdain for those things.
That's why, as I was asking the question, I'm like, "What do you think he's going to say, idiot?" Never mind.
So we used to do when I first started, I was an apprentice. We did a lot of Chicago public schools, which are like the worst of the worst, like nasty. Like they had all those things like shoved everywhere. Those fucking boxes are a pain in the ass to work on.
I just hate the fact that like one little minuscule piece of whatever lands in that freaking drain pan. Forget it. And then you're there, and they never call until there's a Mount Everest laying in the middle of the walk-in. Like, just happened yesterday.
Yeah, what are you supposed to do about it? Like, it's not like you could de-ice it because half the time it's going to like an evap-away pan. So yeah, not a big fan of those.
No.
What about the? Have you done much work with the cold pack units? With the I think Colpack makes them with the glycol condensing self-contains.
No.
So they make. We have a couple stores with them. So they make they're little mini glycol chillers, and they are running the rail, and they're running the actual box off of glycol.
Okay.
So they cool down a little glycol reservoir, almost exactly like the Hill pans.
The seafood ones.
Yes.
Okay.
So they're using those. I mean, they seem like they work pretty good. Little mini pump. I don't get the whole caveat behind it because it seems like a huge efficiency loss. because now you're cooling down glycol. Now you're cooling down. Now you're using a pump. I mean, I don't get the whole thing with it, but like, apparently they're like super popular with like a lot of restaurants.
Yeah. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, always with I mean, whenever you have exchange of anything, right? It doesn't matter. You're going to get some temperature loss, some energy loss there, right? Right.
Yeah, I mean, so it's going to, no matter what, it's going to lose out to a DX system in efficiency.
Yeah.
Where they are expensive, like 12 G's and up.
Wow.
For a prep table. Because I went to go condemn one time, and I got yelled at for like 20 minutes about it.
So some of the other stuff that you'll see with the smaller self-contains, obviously the packing on the receiver can leak. Looks like the only way you're going to be able to tighten up is with a spanner wrench. I think Bonnie Forge makes a socket. You have to.
I have one.
RF 14, I think is what it is.
I found one on eBay. Like they don't make those anymore.
And the only other caveat to that is that you have to have the stem halfway seated in because the prongs on it aren't long enough to actually go up in.
I've never actually used it, but I have it.
I've used it several times. It's rather handy because then if you do have where the packing's totally gone, then you could you can repack it with a multitude of things. So I've used Teflon tape and maybe a piece, maybe 5 or 6 inches long, and rolled it out into like a small little line, and then covered it with Never Seas and wrap it. Take the packing out, wrap the stem up, and shove that in there. And when you tighten the packing, when you put the packing back up, it basically expands that nylon and makes it seal back up. And I've had luck with that, even on rack stuff. Discharge lines where they're leaking out discharge, and they don't want to do anything about it. Obviously, the piece is going to be longer than 5 inches for like a discharge valve, but nonetheless, you could do something like that.
Blue Monster tape works great for discharge valves.
Yeah, just no lubricant around it, just the Monster.
I usually just like put some Nylog on it, like roll it up like thin roll, and just shove it in there. So one other thing, guys, when your service is self-contains and you think there's a leak and you got to gauge up to it, before you do that, if you take the caps off, look, feel for a little bit of pressure behind there, but also grab your leak detector and check the Schraders first. I don't know how many times I've screwed myself, but looking for a leak, can't find a leak. I charge it back up. I come back a couple days later, it's low again, and sure as shit, we're losing a tiny bit of gas out of a Schrader that I missed because my gauges are on there and they're not leaking.
Oh, by the way, service announcement. Service valves on compressors, on receivers, are not meant to have pressure controls on them where you can just mid-seat them. If it's a service valve on a compressor where they have an open port for a pressure control, different story. But as far as a service valve on like a receiver, and you're like, oh, I'll just put a fan cycling switch on that. Don't. Those valves aren't meant to be mid-seated all the time. They're meant to be back-seated or front-seated, not mid-seated. Causes them to leak. Please don't do it.
Yeah, I mean they're not designed for that. So like leak checking, like the stuff before you throw your gauges on there, that's another big one. So making sure you actually like check that before, so you're not like pulling your hair out. And then starting components. I mean, checking out starting components. I'm not the best with this. I usually have to go back to the Copeland book or check everything else out. But like using the Copeland mobile app to see what the amp draw should be, or what relay should be in there, or what cap should be in there, and then actually checking the capacitors to make sure they actually have the right capacitance. Because if you're having starting problems, checking the start cap, checking the run cap, Making sure the start relay is not hanging up.
Oh, making sure the start relay is in the proper position. So
Yes.
on the start relay, there should be, just like on the writing, there's a little thing etched in where it says top, and there's an arrow pointing up. That's there for a reason. We had a unit where the starting components went through, I think 3 or 4 times. So first person went through, changed out the start components, and it looked the same. They just mounted it a little bit different. And because it was mounted upside down, it was making the relay not want to touch on initial startup. So it would put a lot of wear and tear on it. So that one would go bad because the other one was installed that way. We put it in another one and another one. And lo and behold, I go out there with the starting components. I'm like, well, I wonder what the hell's taking it out. And basically it's because it was upside down. It was making that relay not make contact all the time. So it would just intermittently want to start. So make sure it's in the right direction.
I have been burned by changing starting components so many times. I tend to not want to do it. So I'm on the fence about this, like ethically and like getting burned. Okay, because I don't know how many times you go onto a compressor, it's smoking fucking hot. It's, been condenser fans out, or like the starting components are crap. And you go get all new starting components. It's cooled down. It runs. You're the hero because you fixed it for cheap. And then 2 days later, the compressor dies.
I drop them with listen, this could be it. But if that compressor has worn down those starting components, now let me ask you a question, because like I guess in a pinch, I wouldn't be against it, but like, how are you with like the Kickstarters and stuff? The last Hail Mary ditch, just get that thing freaking rolling so you don't have to get a compressor at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Well, first of all, I'm not getting a compressor at 2 o'clock in the morning for a self-contained.
Why not?
Because they can come pick up the van. So I used to carry some of those, like what are they, like those Subco like 3-in-1s or whatever on the van. It was like I would use those to test out like for like the smaller true compressors. I mean, we used to use those. Like I would use them to test the compressor. So I'll use it to fire it up and make sure the compressor started and ran, and then I would let it run on there until I got the starting components. I used to do that a lot. I never really tried a Kickstarter. I beat compressors with a piece of wood.
Yeah. People don't understand, like, I just taking care of a self-contained will just lengthen the life of it. I mean, it sounds stupid. That's it. That's really it. I mean, just keep the damn coils clean, because then it's not going to overheat. If it doesn't overheat, then the oil is not going to break down. If the oil is not going to break down, it's not going to get all gummed up, tear up the compressor, and have high head pressure, which kills the freaking thing. Keep the freaking coils
my
clean.
rule for apprentices and my guys, like if they're working on self-contained, I don't care what you're there for. If it's too cold, too warm, if it's got a gasket out, I would blow out the condenser coil. A, you get to charge your CO2. We're getting paid. You get paid for the CO2. And B, you're extending the life of that self-contained, because now you're cleaning out the coil that's not going to get clean, and you're preventing a callback.
Have you done much propane self-contains?
A little bit here and there. Most of my propane self-contained experience has been with AHT, and those things are like way overly engineered.
Yeah, we talked about that once before, where they had like an analog output signal for their fans. I don't know. It's like putting huh?
It's a self-contained still. I mean, you can paint the pig however you want to paint it, but it's still a pig.
Yeah.
I mean, other than that, like I've done some like true propane work. I mean, most of the propane stuff is like cake. I mean, I still leave the access ports on there, even though they say not to, because all you're doing is screwing the next guy.
but they're so critically charged, man. That's the only thing.
I mean,
you've had hoses freaking, not seal up. You right?
Yeah, I mean, have you seen the price of propane?
No.
It's fucking outrageous.
What is it right now?
It's more than R22.
Come on.
Yeah.
That's freaking nuts.
Yeah, it's outrageous. And it's hard to get. It's the other thing. So like more and more of these propane self-contains are coming in, like it's hard to get.
Well, that's what scares me about the shortage on everything. Like all these CO2 systems going in, I got no problem with CO2. What my problem is that there's just so many of them going in, and with stuff not being able to be put in on time, like you're gonna blow the charge. It's getting ridiculous. Everyone I
seen
talk
an
to,
email going for somebody looking for a service valve between 4 manufacturers. Nobody can find a suction service valve for a compressor.
Really?
Yep.
Like what kind of compressor? Are we talking something oddball? Are we talking Copeland? What?
CO2's transcritical compressor.
What the fuck?
Yeah. Racks down, empty, flat. No way to isolate it.
Really? Oh yeah, I guess not, huh?
Can't run without this compressor either.
So the store's entirely down.
Yep, flat. Not one of my stores, but it's somebody at another company that I know about.
I guess it's going to be on the news that the United States is shorting our food now.
Well, I mean, like same thing with like fixing all these self-contains. Like I like Target's way of doing things. Like they'll put at a certain dollar amount, they just axe that thing. It doesn't matter if it needs a door gasket or if it needs a cord. They're just going to throw it away.
Yeah.
I mean, once it hits that end of life, it's done.
But going back to self-contains, just like any other refrigeration, it's knowing of how it's supposed to run. So freezers, they have to go into a defrost. They typically, unless they're a coffin case, do not turn off the fans. Or I'm sorry, they do turn off the fans. So you're going to turn off the fans once we go into defrost. The heaters are typically going to turn on, raise that temperature up to termination temperature, whatever that might be per that manufacturer. Typically electric defrost is, 50, 55. Usually have a high limit in there, or, some kind of mechanical high limit safety, maybe set for 75 degrees so the coil doesn't overheat. And once the coil's done terminating, once it hits termination temperature, unit's going to turn back on. Fans aren't going to turn on until that same termination temperature. Typically, they'll use the same one for the termination as well as the to turn the fans back on. And then once the fans get back down to, or once the coil gets back down to, what would you say, 20, about 20 or 18 degrees? I know a lot of manufacturers. I've seen some manufacturers say 28, but I don't feel comfortable with that. I'd rather have a full frost pattern on a coil before I start up the damn thing. And you can estimate, about what that's going to be. Say it again?
I would figure at 28, you'd be slinging water still.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, even though it's below freeze, I don't know. I just feel more comfortable bringing it down, closer to where the whole coil is going to have an even frost pattern across it. So, but like I said, once it comes down to about 15, 20 degrees, fans come back on, and refrigeration just continues to happen. And it's just knowing that cycle going over and over in your head, where whether you're doing it with mechanical controls or electronic controls controlling the defrost and refrigeration, it's still the same theory. It's the same thing over and over. They just might have a little bit more bells and whistles. Some of these case controllers, you'll get into defrost skipping. I know Beacon's real big on that, or now it's not Beacon anymore. I want to say QRC.
It's like changed like 4 times now. One thing I want to go over with the freezers that we left out. So usually in a, say, True or they'll feel that usually doesn't matter. Usually all of them use what's called a crankcase pressure regulator in the suction line. What this is doing is protecting the compressor. So this compressor does not have a lot of starting torque. We're on a single phase, 115 volts. They got to keep it under 20 amps. So it doesn't have a starting torque and the load requirements that a normal compressor would. A 3-phase 460 compressor, 208 compressor that can handle a little bit of load increase. So what they use is this crankcase pressure regulator gets set at a certain amperage. So you set this by amperage. So you adjust it at peak load. So the warmest the case is, you throw your amp clamp on there, start the compressor up. You start running this thing in until the run load amps are right at where the compressor calls for, or the max run load amps. And then if you need to back it out, if it's too low, you back it out. It has nothing to do with evaporator pressure or anything like that. In this particular application, you're setting it off run load amps.
Well, it's, that valve is, the CBR is a crankcase pressure regulator. It's an outlet pressure regulator. So it doesn't give a crap, really. It makes sure that the pressure going to the compressor is not exceeding whatever you might have. One instance I had a compressor that was, we were told that we were just replacing it. And then we found out every single time it would pump down and start back up after a defrost, it would be overamping by about 2 amps. And we found that 404, if the pressure on this particular freezer on this coffin case would get down to 40 psi, it would be at full running load amps. So typically we'd have to braze in a crankcase pressure regulator. But in this instance, we actually installed a Sporlan SZP40 power head. And basically what that did was that expansion valve in that instance, when you install it there, does not allow any refrigerant to feed until the suction pressure on the outlet of that valve gets below 40 psi. So we'll basically clamp down until that suction pressure gets below 40 psi, and then it'll start feeding. It's basically doing the same thing as a crankcase pressure regulator. The only thing is crankcase pressure regulator is adjustable. The SZP40 power head is not adjustable. So it's always trying to regulate it at that 40 psi if the pressure is higher than that.
Seems like you usually have one or the other. You have a cap tube and a CPR, or you have the ZP power head.
Yeah, and then that ended up increasing the longevity of the compressor, because they said they were replacing that compressor at least, I think, once a year. The other problem was they had a liquid line solenoid that was all the way at the condensing unit, and the receiver was probably, if you took a 2-liter and you lopped off the first loby part of above the tag, that's how big the receiver was. So it was trying to pump X amount of feet, 75 feet of line set in this little receiver. So the pressure would just keep going up higher and higher. So we ended up having to move the valve downstairs. No harm, no foul. Put the ZP SCP power head in there, and from my understanding, no other problems.
Yeah, so I mean, you shouldn't really have to mess with those from the factory. I mean, they should all be preset. All those CPRs should be preset when everything comes out. So I mean, if guys are messing with them, same thing. If you pull the cap off and it's leaking refrigerant underneath there, it'll lock the valve up and starve the compressor if it gets under the bellows.
So one of them, I just wanted to bring this up because this is one of the most interesting things that I've ever seen. So typically you don't have many of different ports on these units, right? The more ports you have on it, the more potential you have for leaking. I had a unit that was just recharged, and they swore that they did everything right, and what was happening is it was right at the service valve. They had one of the service valves that's on the Copeland condensing units. They'll typically have a service valve that's bolted right before the compressor. So you can basically valve that down and isolate the compressor and cut out the compressor, brace a new one in, pull the vacuum on it. On this one, there was no tap on the compressor. All there was a tap, there was no tap on the compressor. There was only a tap before the service valve. So the problem was the unit would just randomly just shut down but it was shut down on low pressure. It had a dual pressure switch and would just randomly just shut down. And then it would sit for a little bit. And I noticed that the pressure, once it got up past 32 or I think it was like 38 degrees saturated, it would then clear up, and then the refrigerant would start feeding. Well, basically what was happening is we had moisture in the system, and going through that service valve was doing a little venturi, and then all that moisture would drop out in there, it would freeze right there, and then stop the flow of refrigerant to the compressor. The compressor would go off on low pressure, but you wouldn't see it because of where it was tagged in there. So just be mindful. Same thing with when you're pulling a vacuum on these systems. Have the system energized, and if you have to throw on a magnet, if it does have a liquid line solenoid on this thing, put a damn magnet on it, because a lot of times they use internally equalized expansion valves, especially in the real small tonnage. So what happens is, if you have a liquid line solenoid there, that expansion valve, when you're pulling a vacuum, will basically trap air in between the liquid line solenoid and the inlet of the internally equalized expansion valve, and basically trap moisture in there. A guy called me. He had a 134A system running at, I think it was 140 or 150 degrees saturated. And I'm like, that seems a little high. He's like, no, I pull the vacuum. And I said, well, check the line, and how low is your liquid line? And he had, I think, 70 degrees or 60 degrees of subcooling or something ridiculous like that. I was like, man, I think you trapped air in there. He's like, no, man, I had my gauges everywhere. And I was like, just for shits and giggles, I said, recover all the refrigerant that you just put in there, put it off to the side, energize the unit this time, or put a magnet on your solenoid. And he calls me back later. He's like, man, you're right. He's like, that unit A pulled down a hell of a lot faster, and B, the system's working wonderfully. I mean, it was doing the 20-degree rule of saturated condensing temperature above ambient, so it was working awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing with these is just make sure you pull good vacuums, good service procedures, keep them in out of a million dairy kitchen, and they won't have issues. Gaskets, same thing with door gaskets, making sure your door gaskets are good. Making sure that you don't have moisture coming in this. These things cannot handle moisture removal. They're not made to dehumidify. So I mean, you're going to eat up a lot of capacity real quick with that, especially icing up. If you have iced up self-contains, it's another big one. Checking the Dexel controllers to make sure they're actually going in defrost, and or marking the defrost clocks without moving them first. Just mark the pins and make sure it's actually turning. It's another big one. If you have iced up case, don't just go turning that. Or some of these will use a cold control inside of it, making sure that the actual cold control's cutting out when it needs to. If the coil's iced up and cutting back in, you maybe throw a thermometer inside the coil and watch it.
You got anything else?
No, I think it's it for self-contains.
All right. Well, guys, thanks for listening once again, and have a good night.